Nefertiti is famous today because of this iconic bust of her. She has one of the most well-known faces in all of ancient Egypt. The final resting place of ancient Egyptian Queen Nefertiti could finally have been discovered thanks to advances in modern technology. For more than a century, the beauty of Queen Nefertiti has been celebrated as an enduring symbol of ancient Egypt. Her flawless bust resting quietly behind glass has long been seen as a gateway into a golden age more than 3,000 years in the past. But now, a CT scan has looked beneath the surface of that 33-century-old plaster and uncovered a startling truth. It reveals traces of violence, of betrayal, as though behind that unchanging beauty lies a scene that was never meant to be seen. What science has just uncovered is beginning to rewrite the entire story of Nefertiti, a face designed to rule. In 1912, a German archaeological expedition excavating at Tel Elmarna, the ruins of the ancient city of Akatan, uncovered a sculpted bust inside the workshop of an artist named Thutmos. There was no inscription, no royal title, only a face. It took decades before archaeologists reached a consensus that this was a portrait of Nefertiti, the wife of Pharaoh Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt around 1353 to 1336 CE. The bust was transported to Berlin and placed on display at the Neues. The nose was more prominent. The cheeks showed faint lines. The eyes were not perfectly symmetrical. This was the face of a real person, marked by age and time. Unhidden, the outer layer had been carefully built up with plaster, smoothed and reshaped to create a more youthful and perfectly balanced appearance. Thutmos had not simply carved a portrait. He had altered reality. The question emerged immediately. Why? To understand this, it is necessary to consider the context in which the sculpture was created. Akhenaten, Nefertiti's husband, carried out an unprecedented act in Egyptian history. He dismantled the entire traditional system of polytheistic worship, closed temples, stripped power from the priesthood, and declared devotion to a single deity, Aten, the sun disk. It was the most radical religious transformation in ancient Egypt. Within this revolution, Nefertiti was not merely a queen, she became the public face of the new ideology. Reliefs and wall paintings depict her standing beside Akhenaten in ritual scenes and in some cases appearing alone in poses traditionally reserved for kings, striking down enemies, a role no Egyptian queen had ever assumed before. In this context, the bust was not simply a work of art, it was an instrument of messaging. The flawless composed face, untouched by age or instability, represented exactly the image a fragile regime needed to project. Not Nefertiti as she truly was, but Nefertiti as she needed to appear. The fact that the bust was found in a sculptor's workshop rather than in a temple or tomb supports the idea that it functioned as a prototype, a reference model used to reproduce standardized images across the empire, a face designed for replication, distribution, and belief. The face the world sees today is not Nefertiti's real face. It is a refined and idealized version created to serve a specific political purpose. Yet this deception is only the surface. Beneath it lie deeper layers, and each one grows darker than the last. A name erased, an identity rewritten. Nefertiti disappears from the historical record around the 12th year of Akhenaten's 17-year reign. There is no announcement, no recorded funeral. In temples and monuments from the final years of Akhenaten's reign, researchers have identified a striking pattern. Nefertiti's name was deliberately chiseled out and replaced with another, not randomly but systematically across multiple sites. At the same time, a new name appears in historical records. Nefer-Neferuaten, a ruler who governed briefly after Akhenaten and before the rise of Tutankhamun. What stands out is that the royal titles and inscriptions associated with Nefer-Neferuaten contain grammatical markers indicating a female identity. Some inscriptions use feminine pronouns and endings. Egyptologist James Allen and other scholars have argued that Nefer-Neferuaten and Nefertiti were the same individual, suggesting that Nefertiti ascended the throne under a new name after Akhenaten's death or loss of power. Such transformations are not unprecedented in Egyptian history. Hatshepsut, the most prominent female pharaoh, also altered her identity and imagery to rule. But what followed in Nefertiti's case appears even more extreme. Inside the tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, researchers found numerous objects showing clear signs of hurried modification. On certain pieces of jewelry and golden artifacts, original inscriptions using feminine pronouns had been scraped away and replaced with masculine ones. Names had been altered. These changes were not the result of time or natural damage. They were intentional, carried out with tools. The conclusion drawn by many scholars is that these items were originally made for a female ruler, very likely Nefertiti in her role as Nefer-Nefiuaten, and were later repurposed for Tutankhamun during a dynastic transition. Her memory was not simply erased, it was overwritten. This is the second layer of deception. Nefertiti did not just vanish from history. Her history was replaced with someone else's. Names were removed, titles were reassigned, objects were given new owners. And when one returns to the nameless bust, the only royal portrait without an inscription in all of ancient Egypt, the question shifts. It is no longer why her name is missing. It becomes who removed it and why they needed to go that far. Shattered bones and the DNA truth. If names can be erased and objects can be reassigned, then what became of Nefertiti's body? This question has haunted archaeologists for more than a century. In 2022, science offered an answer that few were prepared to accept. In 1817, explorers discovered a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, the royal burial ground near Luxor in Egypt. It was designated KV-21. Inside were two female mummies, both without names, without royal orrery goods, and without burial texts. One of them, labeled KV-21B, had her arms positioned in a royal pose, one hand clenched as if holding a scepter. This suggested she was a woman of royal status. Yet her identity could not be determined at the time. The remains were too degraded for DNA extraction using older techniques. For decades, KV-21B remained in storage, an unsolved question. Then in 2022, an international research team applied next-generation sequencing, a method capable of reading genetic material from extremely small and fragmented samples that older methods could not process. They successfully reconstructed a complete mitochondrial DNA profile. Mitochondrial DNA is passed from mother to child without mixing with paternal DNA. The result was striking. KV-21b shared the same maternal lineage as Tutankhamun. This means she was not only a member of the royal family, but had a direct maternal connection to him. She could have been his mother, aunt, or sister. When combined with existing archaeological evidence, the most likely identity is Nefertiti. But this is not the most disturbing part. When forensic specialists conducted computed tomography scans on KV-21b, they identified injuries that cannot be explained by time or mummification processes. Both arms were broken and twisted behind the back at unnatural angles. The rib cage was crushed. The skull was fractured on one side with sharp-edged breaks that indicate direct impact rather than gradual pressure from surrounding debris. Dr. Sahar Salam, a leading forensic expert at Cairo University specializing in mummy analysis, concluded that these injuries occurred around the time of death. This was a high-ranking royal woman of ancient Egypt, buried without a name in a modest tomb that does not match her status, bearing clear signs of violent trauma on her skeleton. Not an accident, not illness, violence. And the bust displayed in Berlin, the flawless and composed face without a name, was created under the same system of power that could produce such an end. A tomb hidden behind a wall. In 2015, British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves proposed a theory that sent shockwaves through the field. The tomb of Nefertiti may lie hidden behind a wall inside the most famous burial chamber in the world, the tomb of Tutankhamun, known as Cave 62. Reeves did not arrive at this idea through speculation. He conducted a detailed analysis of ultra-high-resolution scans of the burial chamber walls produced in 2014 by the company Factum-Arte. Within these images, he identified faint linear patterns and subtle outlines on the northern and western walls that do not align with the natural structure of limestone. They resemble sealed doorways that have been plastered over and painted. His argument is supported by several anomalies. The tomb, K. 562, is unusually small for a pharaoh. Its layout does not follow standard royal design, and there are signs it was completed in haste. Reeves suggests that the tomb was originally constructed for someone else, most likely Nefertiti, and was later repurposed for Tutankhamun after his sudden death at around 18 or 19 years of age. The original burial chambers, along with their intended occupant, may have been sealed behind the walls. In 2016, a Japanese research team used ground-penetrating radar. Reeves has maintained his position. Egyptian authorities to this day have not permitted any direct physical investigation of the wall, which leaves the central question unanswered. Is Nefertiti resting just meters away from Tutankhamun's treasures? The only way to know would be to open the wall, and that is precisely what no one has been allowed to do. Yet, regardless of whether the hidden tomb exists, the implications are profound. If Nefertiti truly lies concealed behind that wall, then the concealment is nearly perfect. A woman who once stood beside a pharaoh may now remain hidden beneath the legacy of a boy king who followed her. No name, no marker, separated by only a thin barrier from the hands of millions who pass by each year. The daughters and a systematic purge. If the successors of the Amarna period intended to erase Nefertiti's legacy, removing her name and concealing her body would not have been enough. Those who carried her bloodline also had to disappear. And that is precisely what appears to have happened to her 6 daughters. Miratatan, Meketen, Ankasenpatan, Nefer, Nefuatan, Tasherit, Nefer Neferura, and Setup. Their names once appeared frequently on temple walls at Amarna during the early years of Akhenaten's reign. They were depicted in family scenes, religious rituals, and royal processions. Then, after year 12, their presence in the historical record begins to fracture one by one. Meketen, the second daughter, is recorded as having died around year 14 of the reign. In the royal tomb at Amarna, a wall scene shows her parents mourning over her body. It is one of the rare emotional images that survive from this period. Yet, the scene contains a puzzling detail. A nurse stands nearby holding a newborn child. In the context of Erari scene, the presence of an infant not explained by any inscription is unusual. Some scholars suggest that Meketen may have died during childbirth, possibly involving a close familial union, a practice documented within the Egyptian royal family. Ankasenpatan, the third daughter, is the most extensively documented case. After the fall of the Amarna regime, she reappears under the name Ankhamun and becomes the wife of Tutankhamun, her half-brother. This was not a union of choice, but a political arrangement to legitimize succession. After Tutan's early death, She wrote to the king of the Hittites, a powerful kingdom in Anatolia in what is now modern Turkey, pleading for one of his sons to become her husband because she refused to marry one of her own attendants. It was an act of desperation from a woman who had lost her final source of power. The Hittite prince sent in response was murdered on his journey. Akatan disappears from the record soon after. No tomb, no remains. The remaining 4 daughters leave almost no trace beyond this period. There are no confirmed records of their deaths. No mummies have been definitively identified as any of them. From 6 daughters of one of the most powerful women in Egypt, official history preserves only fragmented inscriptions. This is not a coincidence. When Horb, the general who rose to power after Tutankhamun, initiated a campaign to erase the Amarna legacy, he did not stop at removing names from temple walls. He eliminated those who could claim that legacy. Without tombs, there could be no Arari cult. Without Arari cults, there could be no political power in the religious system of ancient Egypt. And without recognized descendants, the Amarna bloodline ceased to exist in legal and historical terms, even if it may have continued biologically. A nameless bust in Berlin, a possible body with shattered bones and an unmarked tomb. 6 daughters erased from history. This was not an accident. It was a campaign. Genetics and the cost of a divine bloodline. There is one final layer, and this is not one created by human intention. It is written by nature itself within the DNA of the Amarna family, and it helps explain why this entire dynasty collapsed so quickly and so violently. In 2010, a study published in the medical journal JAMA conducted genetic analysis on several mummies associated with Tutankhamun. The original aim was to establish identity and family relationships, but the findings went far beyond that goal. Researchers identified clear evidence of multiple generations of close kin marriages, unions between individuals who were closely related. This was a deliberate practice within the Egyptian royal family. By marrying within the royal line, they believed they were preserving a divine bloodline. Genetically, the consequence is the accumulation of harmful recessive genes. These are genes that may remain hidden when only one copy is present, but can cause disease when inherited from both parents. Tutankhamun is a clear example. CT scans revealed deformities in his feet, signs of multiple medical conditions, and a fragile skeletal structure. He required walking sticks to move. Several such sticks were found in his tomb, not as symbols of authority, but as practical tools. He died at around 18 or 19 years of age, likely due to complications from accumulated health conditions. When the DNA profile of KV21b was added to analysis in 2022, a particular mutation drew attention. It is associated with connective tissue disorders, conditions that affect the tissues binding organs and bones together. Such disorders can make bones more fragile, slow the healing of injuries, and increase the risk of internal bleeding. Placed alongside the evidence of violent trauma on KV21b, a possibility emerges. Whoever inflicted that violence may have known that this woman was physically more vulnerable than most, more susceptible to fatal injury. If this individual was indeed Nefertiti, then her immense political power stood in stark contrast to her biological fragility. Beyond genetics, studies of tissue samples from mummies of the Amarna period have revealed another troubling factor. Levels of mercury, arsenic, and lead dust are unusually high compared to mummies from other periods. These substances are linked to mineral-based pigments widely used in the sun temples and palaces of Amarna. Long-term exposure can damage the nervous system, weaken the immune response, and gradually reduce bone strength. In other words, the very environment created by the Amarna court. Radiant sun temples adorned with mineral pigments may have slowly poisoned them over years, not through intent, not as a conspiracy, but with a similar outcome. A ruling family with declining health, weakened immunity, and shorter lifespans. The Amarna dynasty did not only fail politically, it failed biologically. And Nefertiti, despite being among the most powerful of them, was not immune to that reality. What that face really is, return to the bust displayed in the Neues Museum in Berlin, seen in light of everything uncovered. The sculpture carries a meaning entirely different from how it is often presented. It is not a symbol of timeless beauty. It is not a tribute to a great queen. It is a constructed object created during a period of unstable power designed for a specific purpose, and preserved into the present largely by chance because it was left behind in a sculptor's workshop when the city of Amarna was abandoned. The outer face, perfect, symmetrical, youthful, is the controlled version. The idealized version, the one approved by authority. The inner face, less refined, marked by subtle lines and asymmetry, is closer to reality, yet still only stone and plaster. The real woman may lie in Tomb Cafe 21, unnamed, her bones broken, buried in a manner unworthy of any member of Egypt's royal family. There is, however, a striking paradox. Those who erased Nefertiti's name from temple walls, repurposed her objects, concealed her body, and removed her daughters from history, succeeded in nearly everything they attempted. Her name all but vanished from Egyptian records for more than 3,000 years. Her tomb remains unidentified. Her daughters left behind almost no trace. Yet, there was one thing they failed to erase. The bust was left behind in a sculptor's workshop when the city was abandoned. No one carried it away. No one removed its name because it never had one. No one destroyed it because no one knew it existed. It lay buried beneath sand for over 3,000 years before re-emerging in 1912 and becoming one of the most recognized faces in the entire history of ancient Egypt. The irony is unmistakable. The sculpture survived precisely because it was anonymous. Had it borne an inscription, it might have been discovered and destroyed during the campaign to erase the Amarna legacy. Each new method removes another layer from the official narrative, and the face that is beginning to emerge beneath, like the true face hidden under plaster, is not perfect, not serene, not eternal. It is the face of a real woman within a real story shaped by real enemies and concluded in a way that history attempted to bury. The most beautiful sculpture in history is not a portrait. It is evidence of a crime whose victim has yet to be named.